Assalamualaikum and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Department of Science and Technology Studies, STS Talks. Today is the first installation of the STS Talks series for the year 2021. This is meant to be a monthly intellectual event where distinguished scholars are invited to give a talk on issues in science and technology studies from philosophical, historical, social, political, economic, and religious perspective. Well, my name is Khairul Anam. I'm a senior lecturer in philosophy and apparently the only philosopher in the department at the moment. And actually, it was Professor Hazim Shah who brought me to STS department some like 12 years ago when he was the head of department. And it's really my great pleasure to introduce Professor Mohd Hazim Shah to you this afternoon. Professor Mohd Hazim Shah holds a bachelor's degree in liberal studies in science from the University of Manchester, a master's degree in philosophy from London School of Economics, and a PhD in the history and philosophy of science from the University of Pittsburgh, USA. He is currently serving as a professor in the School of Languages, Civilization and Philosophy, College of Arts and Sciences at the Universiti Utara Malaysia, where he teaches philosophy courses under the Bachelor of Philosophy, Law and Business program. Prior to his retirement in 2015, he was a professor of the History and Philosophy of Science at the Department of Science and Technology Studies, University of Malaya, where he was the head of department from 2001 to 2007. Upon retirement, he served as a senior research fellow in the same department from May 2015 to May 2016. He has also served as the deputy director of the International Institute of Public Policy and Management, Universiti Malaya, from October 2017 to August 2018, before joining the Universiti Utara Malaysia. He was the president of the Malaysian Social Science Association from 2010 to 2014. And Professor Hazim has published widely in a number of local and international journals, as well as book chapters and edited books. His areas of expertise cover the history and philosophy of science, the relationship between science, religion, and culture, and comparative studies on science and philosophy in Islamic and Western civilizations. He has been appointed as a member of the Science and Islam Task Force, which was headed by the former Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or OIC, Professor Dr. Akmaluddin Ihsanoglu in 2015-2016. He has also spent time as a visiting research fellow at the University of Melbourne, Australia in 1993, and at the Department of History and Philosophy of Science, University of Cambridge in 2008. And thank you very much, Prof, for joining us this afternoon. Without further ado, Professor Hazim Shah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Anam, for that kind introduction. I must say that I'm pleased to be back to the department, although virtually. And I hope that after all this COVID and PKP is over, I'm able to make a physical presence there, inshallah. And as Anam has said, I've had a long association with the department, and I have taught courses there, especially courses on history and philosophy of science. And I think the department serves an important role and function, although I was told that recently there has been some changes, which is perhaps not to the advantage of the department, but I believe that the department can still play an important role in whatever capacity the university deems it fit to serve the university. Yeah? But I think this intellectual role of the department in dealing with issues concerning science, technology, and society, and history and culture, and so on, must be continued. Yeah? Because it is the only department in the country, I believe, which has the intellectual resources as found in the staff, as constituted by the staff, to serve this function. Yeah? Otherwise, the nation will not have any organization, intellectual organization, that would be able to look at some of the critical issues concerning science and technology and its implications for Malaysian society specifically, and the world community generally. Yeah, so I do hope that the university will see the importance of science and technology studies, and that the staff will continue to play their role towards this end. Yeah? Okay, so as fulfilling the intellectual seminar series organized by the department, I'm happy to accept the invitation by the department to give a talk. And I've chosen as the topic of my talk today, the title, Theoretical Speculations on a Post-COVID World. By the way, so the title is Theoretical Speculations on the Post-COVID World. Now, this is basically a continuation of what I wrote in a previous article, which was published in the Southeast Asian Social Science Review, a flagship journal of the Malaysian Social Science Association. Yeah? And it is also a result of my own thinking on the subject of COVID-19. Yeah? Of course, it's a topical issue and something which we are going through now. Yeah? And I've been invited to speak on this matter, on COVID, by the Universiti Utara Malaysia as well. Yeah? So I've spoken on it to the university audience, Universiti Utara Malaysia, and I wrote an article, although they are not the same topics, concerning COVID from different aspects. Yeah? But my lecture today is basically a sequel or continuation of the one which I wrote, of the article which I wrote, the think piece which I wrote on COVID-19, titled The COVID-19 Pandemic, a Great Unintended Social Experiment. Yeah? What I meant by that was that this is something which enables us to see what happens to society when the societal conditions are changed, are altered, because that is basically the nature of an experiment. Yeah? You change the natural conditions of a phenomena, and then you see what is the outcome, what are the effects of these changed circumstances. Yeah? And here, what's happening is the world has been running according to a set of conditions which previously hold. But then suddenly the COVID pandemic came, and those set of conditions no longer hold, they are changed. And the main change that occurred as a result of the pandemic is basically that of social distancing. It might sound simple, a simple phenomena, social distancing, but it has tremendous implications in terms of social organization, in terms of economics, politics, social interaction, and so on and so forth. And in fact, my take is that it changed the nature of society to some extent, and future economic, political, and international relations. So this is not a transient phenomena. This is not a passing thing. And it is important for us to understand what is going on here and what the future holds as a result of this change brought about by the COVID pandemic. Yeah, because we are here looking at an important phenomena in terms of social change and social organization. Yeah? Because of the changed circumstances and how it interacts with technology and the role which technology plays in this whole process. Yeah, and as Department of Science and Technology Studies, I think this is something for you to think about. Yeah, it is meant for you to grind on. Yeah? And this issue has to be tackled and has to be looked at from a multidisciplinary point of view. Yeah, because it involves a host of different and separate issues, but nevertheless interlinked or interrelated. Yeah, it involves sociology, it involves philosophy, it involves economics, and it involves politics. Yeah, in order to fully understand this phenomena of COVID and its social implications, and my own speculations on what will happen next as in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah? Because although vaccine is now available, but I don't think this is the end of the story. Yeah? It is part of the process of change that is taking place. Yeah? And it's not so much that I have found the answers to all the questions that I have raised in my slides today, and which I will be presenting today. It's more a question of thinking aloud, of me thinking aloud and sharing my thoughts with you all, and hoping to get some feedback at the end of the talk, because I'm still, my mind is still running over these things, over these issues. I'm still thinking about it, and I'm trying to find relevant materials, articles, and so on in order to further understand what's some of the issues that I've raised in this lecture or in my previous paper. Yeah? Okay, I will look at it from 5 aspects. Yeah? Namely, number 1, on the role of government in the economy and society, state versus market, in other words. Yeah? Number 2, concerning the rationalization of society, as this idea of rationalization of society, social or societal and cultural rationalization, which was first brought about or introduced by the German sociologist Max Weber, yeah? Who created his own school of thought, the Weberian school of thought in sociology. Yeah? And how the increased use of IT and online transactions, online interactions, has led to a further rationalization of society, not to its reduction. Yeah? I will try and explain that later. Yeah? And then number 3, Anam, can you just go through the next slide so that I remember what's the third point? Yeah. Yeah. In relation to the program concerning knowledge economy and IR 4.0, which was the hot thing, yeah, in all science and technology policy planning and so on, in the beginning in the 90s and continuing in the 21st century. Science and technology policies are geared towards knowledge economy, and more recently towards IR 4.0. And I think there's a book written by, I can't remember who that guy was, it escapes my mind, but he was a scholar who I think is probably based or connected to Davos, yeah, the Davos Economic Summit, and he published a book on IR 4.0. Yeah? And it caught on this idea of IR 4.0 with artificial intelligence being put in the economic system and so on. And with the coming of COVID pandemic, it stalled somewhat. And I would like to discuss what are the implications on this trajectory, this technological advancement trajectory in terms of IR 4.0 with the coming of COVID, yeah? With the presence of COVID at the moment. Yeah? Okay, and then the fourth thing that I want to discuss is, can you move to the next slide, please? Okay, the economic inequalities that began to surface, yeah, as a result of the COVID pandemic. Yeah? Economic inequalities which were not so glaring before, although it was acknowledged, yeah, the presence of economic inequalities, that there is still poverty in society, but it was somehow not seen to be an important thing in society, and especially with all this optimism about economic growth and so on, and under the previous administration during Najib's time, I remember, the goal was to attain a high income level society and so on, and economic figures which were thrown about showing how Malaysia is progressing in terms of economic growth and so on. Because of all that hype, real poverty which exists in society was not really noticed, until the COVID pandemic, when people, especially those, well, I would perhaps also use the term B40, although I'm not too happy with that. Those, not only, I would say, lower income group, but those who earn their income on a daily basis, what in Malay is called kais pagi, makan pagi, kais petang, makan petang. These people are badly affected. They are the ones who are worst affected, apart, of course, from those who are unemployed. Because with lockdown, it means that they do not have daily income. Without daily work, they don't have daily income, which means to say they don't have any income at all. And this becomes more apparent as a result of the COVID. And also the digital divide, which was there on paper, its implications were not seriously realized until the COVID pandemic came, and then you realize what it means if you don't have access to internet. And it involves not a small number of people, but quite a large number. When you think about, for example, those who live in the interior areas like in Sabah and Sarawak, education access facilities is simply cut out from them. That's what it means. Okay, and point number 5, quickly. The next slide. Point number 5 is related to China, the rise of China as a world economic and perhaps also political and military power in the near future. And how China will play a more important role in world affairs in future, because of all the countries, especially the advanced countries, that is affected by the COVID pandemic, China is the one that has been most successful in dealing with this crisis. And therefore, it now has an advantage over the rest. When the rest are still struggling with recovery, China, I think, has almost passed the recovery stage and moving on to the next stage of economic growth. Okay, so those are the 5 points that I want to discuss today, and I think they're important issues. So Anam, can you go back to the second slide, I think? Oh, yes, okay. Now, let me start with the first point on the role of government in the economy and society. Here, I would like to recall a previous debate concerning the role of government in the economy. And at one time, especially after the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989, we see a dissolution of the bipolar world, which was present before due to the presence of the two superpowers, the two blocks amongst the superpowers, that is the so-called socialist bloc on one side, consisting of Russia and China. And on the other hand, you have the so-called free world, mainly led by the United States and its allies, its European allies, and so on. But with the collapse of the Berlin Wall, what it meant was that socialism basically lost in the struggle against capitalism. And even China, for example, adopted capitalist aspects of the economy. So it has more private enterprise and so on. It allows businessmen to operate and so on. It's not the case of nationalizing all economic resources and so on, unlike previously under the previous regime, let's say under Mao Zedong. So with the decline of socialism and the rise of neoliberalism, it was thought that perhaps this trend should continue, and the market should prevail over the state. Yeah, so that even the state is seen as a form of a market. Yeah, and Kenichi Omi, the Japanese economist and thinker, wrote an influential and important book called The End of the Nation State. Yeah, and Kenichi Omi, in fact, was quite influential on Tun Mahathir. Yeah? And I remember in the 80s, Malaysia also adopted this model of privatization and so on, which tries to decrease the role of government in the economy. More private sector and private enterprise in the economy, and less government intervention in the economy. And this is, as I've said, helped on the world stage by the decline of socialism. Yeah? And Russia, the Soviet Union, of course, disintegrated. You see some of the states in the previous Soviet Union becoming independent and so on. So we saw a decline of socialism and the rise of neoliberalism, and more free market and more world trade and so on. And it was thought that the world is now going to enjoy economic prosperity on a worldwide basis, on a global basis, and there'll be increased globalization and so on and so forth. Yeah? And the state is seen to be almost like an obstacle or a hindrance to economic growth. Yeah? And it was thought that private enterprise should predominate over the state and over government. Yeah? But what the COVID pandemic taught us is the opposite, that the state is seen to be crucial in handling the crisis. Yeah? Because if things were to be left to the free market, then there'll be no central bodies, central government or central power authority to coordinate and organize efforts in curbing and regulating the COVID pandemic. So the role of the state becomes now crucial. Yeah, and not only in terms of organizing matters socially for public medical health purposes in controlling COVID, but also in economic terms. Because unless people were given economic support with lockdowns and so on, they won't be able to survive. Yeah, especially those whom I've said earn income on a daily basis. Yeah, it's all right for those who earn regular salary, for example, civil servants and so on, school teachers or police personnel and so on, who earn on a monthly basis, get their monthly salary. And it's all right also for the rich who have huge savings. Yeah? But with the introduction of lockdown, what it means for the small businessmen, for example, is that they don't have any means of living. They don't have an income. Yeah, so the government has to step in and provide the stimulus packages. And in fact, it is a form of direct aid to the have-nots, to the poor. Yeah? And it's, if you think of it in terms of neoclassical economics, it's a sort of a Keynesian economics, yeah? Where, according to John Maynard Keynes, in order for the slack in the economy due to reduced investment, when there is an disequilibrium between savings and investment, when people invest less than there are savings, yeah, then there will be a contraction in the economy. So the government has to pump in money, inject money into the economy in order to avoid economic depression. Yeah? So here, it's an extension of this Keynesian idea, Keynesian move in the economy, where the government has to pump in money, inject money into the economy in order to prevent the economy from further sliding down, from further contracting. Yeah? And this is known in this COVID period as stimulus packages. And in fact, huge amounts have been put in. as part of the stimulus packages, billions, in fact, to the tune of billions of ringgit. Yeah, and this is not something which is only peculiar to Malaysia. In fact, I think Malaysia adopted this move, this strategy, as a result of what other countries have done. Yeah? Even countries like European countries or even the United States of America, after Donald Trump, of course, has resorted to stimulus packages in order to support a large section of their populations. Yeah? Otherwise, people will starve. They don't have any money to support their families. So you can see the vital role played by the government here in handling the COVID crisis economically. Yeah. So if you were to go by the neoliberal idea of reducing the role of government in the economy and letting the free market reign, then it will be disastrous. The COVID pandemic will simply mean not only a medical threat, but also a threat to the livelihood of the poor. And this will create social instability and all sorts of other problems, yeah? Social unrest and so on. And we can see the protests that have occurred in some countries when government introduced lockdowns, because they say that they wouldn't be able to survive if they don't have any means of living, any income earned. Yeah? So the point to notice here is that this neoliberal trend towards privatization, towards reduced role of government, cannot be accepted under these circumstances and then these new circumstances. And I believe that in future also, there will be this realization that in times of crisis, it is crucial for the government to play an important role in saving the people. Yeah, because you need a strong central authority to organize things and so on. And the free market is not in a position to do this, because the free market operates on the basis of price signals based on profit maximization and so on, allocation of resources due to price changes, price differences and so on. And this sort of mechanism is simply not catered to dealing with such a crisis, yeah? Which can lead to a situation of make or break. Yeah. So I think one of the lessons, important lessons to be learned from this COVID pandemic, is that the role of the government in the economy must not be underestimated. Yeah, and the government should be given due presence in the economy, and its role must and function must be recognized and acknowledged and accepted. Yeah, and even after the pandemic has ended, yeah, I believe that the role of the government in the economy must still remain there for it to function under moments or times of crisis. Yeah, because if you leave it to the free market and the government has forgotten how to manage the economy from its end, from its side, then when new crisis comes up, which might not only be in the form of pandemic, but maybe some other crisis which requires strong central authority to deal with it, then the government might forget how to manage things. So in the post-pandemic era, I believe that this neoliberal trend towards the rise of the free market as opposed to the government, I think there will be some change of mind regarding this. Yeah? This neoliberal economic tendency. Yeah? Okay, my second point is regarding the increasing rationalization of society. Yeah? And how the COVID pandemic has affected this. The question to ask here is the increasing trend towards social rationalization, is it dampened by the COVID crisis, or is it accelerated by the COVID crisis? Yeah, and my take on this is it leads to an acceleration of rationalization of society rather than the opposite. Yeah, What do I mean by the rationalization of society? Yeah? This concept of rationalization has been introduced by Max Weber, the German sociologist who lived in the 19th and also the 20th century. I think he spans both centuries. And his idea has been taken up by some others, including the later German thinker, more contemporary German thinker, Jürgen Habermas, yeah, who has written also on this concept of rationalization of society. Yeah? And I suppose the simple way of understanding it is to think of rational planning of society. Yeah? That our life has become increasingly based on rational thought and rational mode of action and rational planning. Yeah, it's hardly the case now that we lead our lives without any form of prior thinking or prior planning. Yeah, both at the individual as well as the social level. Yeah? If you think of it in terms of the nation state, for example, yeah, you can see that most nation states adopt this idea of 5-year economic plans. Yeah? Malaysia being no exception. Yeah? We have our own 5-year economic plan. So everything is planned ahead. So don't think that things happen at random. No. There's always planning at every level and every level of social organization and so on. The federal government, the state, the local councils, the local authorities, the universities and so on. We all have our rational planning in order to organize ourselves. Yeah, and this is the mode of social action now, that everything is based on rational planning, rational thought, rational action. Yeah, and in the case of the private sector, for example, the case of the case of planning is manifested, for example, theoretically through the work of Frederick Taylor, who is the father of scientific management. Yeah? The idea of scientific management, which was applied by Henry Ford in his assembly line, in fact. Yeah. So everything has to be rationally planned. Yeah? And the idea of scientific management has been taken up by some organizations, yeah, firms, and so on. And another manifestation of this idea of rationalization is found in both the theory and practice of bureaucracy. And the phenomenon of bureaucracy has been analyzed by the same sociologist, Max Weber, where he looks at the phenomena of bureaucracy and how various organizations are manifestations or examples of bureaucracies. Yeah? For example, government departments are bureaucracies. Even the university is now a bureaucracy. Yeah? You have your administration at the top, and then the middle level management, and then the lower level management, and so on. Everything is bureaucratized. Yeah? You have a set of rules and regulations which are to be followed by every member of the organization. Yeah? And now you have a further bureaucratization of the university through ISO. Yeah, ISO is a form of bureaucratization also. Yeah, so that all those are forms of rationalization. Yeah? And as I've pointed out in my previous article, my thinking on this is that physical proximity, which is the fact that people work close together in any organization, whether it's an organization that serves the purpose of economic production or whether it's organization that serves the purpose of education like the university, they all involve people working together within a enclosed space, enclosed physical space. Yeah? What I argued in that paper was that I believe that this mode of social organization, which are economically related and related also to public administration and so on, they are an offshoot or a result of rationalization through bureaucratization. Yeah, because in the idea of a bureaucracy, you have your overall organization, and you have the different roles which are played by different groups within the organization, yeah, and they are interrelated, yeah. So they are not only interrelated in functional terms on paper, but on the ground itself, yeah. So that is why, for example, you have an organization or a company located within the same physical space, yeah. Like, for example, university has its own campus. Of course, there are universities which don't have campus of its own. I mean, like London School of Economics is scattered over London. Yeah? But most universities, they have their own campus. Yeah? And it implies physical proximity. Yeah? People have to be within reach of each other, yeah, in order to carry out the task within this overall organization. Yeah? So this is the idea of rationalization through bureaucratization. Yeah, and what the COVID pandemic did and showed us was that this physical proximity as a precondition of work is crucial to the nature of modern production and modern administration. Yeah, because a bureaucracy implies a sort of a set of functions that has to be served by different groups of people, which are then integrated within this overall group, and that what is needed is for these different groups to interact within proximate physical space. Yeah, and when the COVID came, it really points out to this fact that it strikes at the heart of the matter, that now, because of COVID, you cannot work on the basis of physical proximity. So this affects the whole rationalization, yeah, process. So what does it mean now? Does it mean that it leads to a lesser rationalization of society because now the precondition of physical proximity cannot be met? Okay, now an interesting thing has developed here, yeah, I think. And I think philosophers of technology and also sociologists of studying science and society has to look at this more closely. Yeah? What has happened here is an interesting phenomena. Yeah? And here, if you look at it carefully, at the eve of what I would call the eve of the pandemic, there has been this hype about IT and IR 4.0, the increased use of technology, especially ICT. Yeah. And it wasn't aimed at all towards handling pandemic. Yeah. The whole idea of IR 4.0 was to increase economic production. Yeah? It was to be the fourth stage of the Industrial Revolution. Yeah? Industrial Revolution, what it did was to keep on increasing levels of economic production. And IR 4.0 was thought to continue that trajectory. Yeah. So just like how Mahathir introduced this idea of multimedia technology and so on when he was Prime Minister, especially in the 1990s, yeah? It had no idea, and the idea of e-government and so on, without, foreseeing that there's a pandemic coming. Yeah, but thank God it served a very useful purpose. Yeah, because when the pandemic came, the only way to maintain normal functioning of the bureaucracy of businesses and so on is through online transactions. Yeah, which requires the use of ICT and the internet technology. So you can see here how the process of increasing economic growth and increasing rationalization of society was continued, but through a different path, through the path of what one would say the path of pre-IR 4.0. because we are not there yet. Yeah. So in other words, although it was unintended, this whole growth of multimedia technology and ICT and so on, it was not intended to deal with the COVID pandemic, but its presence was really handy in helping us to continue normal functioning during the COVID period. Yeah. And you can see this very clearly. For example, you just look at university education or even school education. It would have come grind to a halt if not for what we would call now online learning, which is the use of ICT and internet technology. Yeah. So what was initially developed, not with the purpose or aimed at dealing with pandemics, which require social distancing, then became used for this purpose. Yeah. And it now meant that rationalization has now occurred at a different plane, not at the plane of physical interactions and physical divisions on the ground, but on the basis of intellectual mapping out, or what I would call intellectual conceptualizations, which are then put not only on paper, but on computer programs. Yeah. So that, as I've put here, the web becomes now the locus of social rationalization as opposed to physical on-site rationalization. Yeah. The web has become the locus of social rationalization and rationalization of social order instead of rationalization being manifested on the ground in terms of physical division of labor and physical division of space. You see what I mean? Yeah. Let me give you an example of the web as a locus of rationalization and rational planning. Yeah. Okay. Now, how do you conduct to make things easy for you to understand? I give this example, yeah? Because I think it is close to you in terms of your own experience as a university lecturer during this period of COVID pandemic. How do you actually organize your class? Yeah. Now, what I find crucial in this whole process of conducting online classes is the use of the website. Yeah. Here, it's called UUM Online Learning, but it's the same, I think, Moodle system, they call it. In Universiti of Malaya, I remember it was e-spectrum. Yeah. So now that becomes the locus of your educational activity. You refer to that online website, to that portal. The students also refer to that portal. So it becomes the virtual office, really. What was previously done on the ground in classrooms and in your departmental office now becomes done through the website. Yeah. And there you can actually plan things out more rationally, because what I would call the paper organization, yeah, what previously we would call a paper organization has become the actual form of organization. You see what I mean? Previously, you might have, you put on your drawing board, your schedule or your plan for the week or for the month. But now that plan on paper is now put on the website, you see. And students also refer to it, and it becomes a locus of interaction, you see. So ideas which are thought out and put on paper then becomes put on the website. And this is a form of direct rationalization, I think. Yeah. Although it's virtual, but it is nevertheless a platform for communication. Yeah. You take that away, if you have, let's say, what you call a meltdown of the system, of the computer system, or sometimes on certain days you have what is called a shutdown, yeah, internet shutdown, you see what effect it has on your work, yeah. And this not only occurs in university education or school education, it also occurs in the private sector, and more important still, in the private sector. Just imagine the banking system, yeah. Nowadays, we conduct our banking transactions online. You see, so the portal of the bank then becomes the locus of interaction, and also the locus of the rationalization of the banks, of the banking sector, of the private sector. Yeah. So now it is an important task for the banks to improve their portals, their website, and so, because that's the locus of interaction. Yeah, and that's the mode of that's manifestation of the mode of their social organization and banking, rational bank mode of social interaction and administration and planning and so on. Yeah, so you see how this whole process has come together unintentionally. Yeah, and and this will be the trend for the future. Yeah, but it does not come without any problems. Yeah, and I will try to explain some of these problems soon. Yeah, and yeah, and I also mentioned about rationalization as disembeddedness. Perhaps I will take a few minutes to explain, because it might sound mysterious when I put it that way. Yeah, rationalization as disembeddedness. Yeah. The idea of disembeddedness actually is not something original with me. I got it from the British sociologist Anthony Giddens, yeah, in his book on globalization and modernity. Well, something to that effect, not the exact title, where Giddens analyzed the phenomena of globalization as a form of disembeddedness. What is meant by that? Well, he said, if you look at the process of global interactions, especially through cyberspace, it involves a person not being, or rather being more related to the virtual space more than to the actual space, to the environment or the physical surroundings around him. Yeah, so the person becomes more connected to the web, through which he makes these global connections with his counterparts in other parts of the world and so on. And that transcends the limits of his immediate physical environment. Yeah, I mean, you might think that I'm talking too abstractly, but to give you a simple example, yeah, let's say you go out for a family dinner in town. Yeah, now what happens there? You find that each member of the family is, well, not in all cases, but I think in most cases, will be looking at their handphones, yeah, WhatsApping with their friend, or Googling something, you know, rather than chatting with their family members. Yeah, so that's a form of easy way for me to explain the form of disembeddedness. You are detached from your immediate environment, you are disembedded, and you are connected to this virtual web, which is more abstract, but it's more real to you because of your involvement in social media and so on. So that has become the new reality, what Baudrillard would call the simulacrum. Yeah, the philosophical idea of simulacrum, where the virtual becomes the real. Yeah? And perhaps another way of me trying to explain this idea of disembeddedness is, for example, when you attend international teleconferences. Yeah, someone from, you yourself from Asia, you know, and then someone from America, and then someone from South Africa, and then someone from Europe. You see, they are all interacting at different local times. Yeah, so they are disembedded from their own physical locality. In other words, I mean, you might have to be speaking online at 4 o'clock in the morning, which people don't normally do. Yeah. So your partner might be thinking that you're waking up for tahajjud at 4 a.m., but you're actually doing an online teleconferencing with someone from Brazil or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. So what becomes then the common denominator is your rational planning across space and time. You see, so now rationalization implies this embeddedness from your immediate physical surroundings, from your immediate physical space, and the notion of place. Yeah, the notion of place has become replaced by notion of space. This is very important distinction in Aristotelian philosophy. Yeah, because place is different from space. Place has a qualitative element to it. Yeah, I mean, what makes it different for you to be in Kedah as opposed to, let's say, in Kuala Lumpur, is because the space around you involves a kind of ambience and social interaction which is different from the one you experience in Kuala Lumpur. Yeah, but globalization has tended to erase those differences, and one of the manifestations of globalization now is internet technology. And this becomes more apparent now with the COVID crisis, where most seminars are conducted online. And when you have international virtual seminars, you begin to get a greater sense of this disembeddedness, the notion that now space has replaced place, as space has replaced place. Yeah, okay. So let's move on to the next point, the point number 3. Yeah. Question I raise here is, and I think it's an important, pertinent question to be raised at this point and during this period. That is, what effect does COVID-19 has on the rise of the knowledge economy and IR 4.0? Does COVID dampen the progressive growth of the K economy and IR 4.0? Okay, it's not an easy question to answer, and I don't think the answer is to be given in terms of yes or no or simplistic answer. It has to be a nuanced answer, nuanced reply, yeah? Which takes several things into consideration. Yeah? Now, what are the things that we should take into consideration here? Yeah? Well, I think there are two opposing factors that we have to think about. Yeah. On the one hand, the priority which governments will involve themselves in, will engage in, once the COVID pandemic, not to say it's over, but is on the decline or has slowed down, one of its main priorities, including the Malaysian government, is to go for not economic growth, but economic recovery. Yeah, is unlike the previous orientations. It was for economic growth, but now the emphasis should be more on economic recovery rather than economic growth. And I think there's a difference. Yeah, some might ask me why make the distinction? Doesn't economic growth also helps economic recovery? No, I don't think that is so. Why? Because growth could imply benefit to the middle and upper income levels mainly, but not to the lower income levels. Yeah? Because the way economic growth takes place, it might be unequal over strata of society. Yeah. So because of the serious social problems that it will lead to if the problems of the poor are not addressed, yeah, then economic recovery has to be given priority, which means to say that unemployment has to be tackled, because lots of people have lost jobs. Yeah, to bring it back to the ground level. Yeah, lots of people have lost jobs. Yeah, including someone whom I know personally also, they've lost jobs. And so economic recovery would have to cater for this group of people who have lost their jobs. So government has to take steps in order to decrease unemployment and raise the level of employment in the country. So if you go for a strategy of high-tech development, which is capital intensive rather than labor intensive, then what this means is that you're not going to be able to solve the problem of unemployment, of increased unemployment. Because ICT is capital rather than labor intensive, which means to say that you cannot provide that many jobs. You only will be able to provide the jobs to people who have the skills in ICT, and not many have those skills. So the job market has to cater for not only those who are semi-skilled and skilled, but also those who are unskilled, or those who have lost jobs in lucrative industries before, like for example, the aviation industry. Pilots also have lost jobs and they become, Grab food drivers and so on. The food becomes food delivery boys, Panda Food or Grab Food or whatever, when previously they were pilots, airline pilots. So the government, I believe, will, if they're sensible enough, will go for a policy of economic recovery and target increase employment overall, rather than allocating resources for R&D, for example, or for ICT. But this, of course, does not mean that there will be a total neglect of ICT, of allocation of resources for ICT. Why? Because the government has seen the importance of ICT in handling the COVID crisis. In other words, it is very handy in dealing with situations which requires social distancing. And you can never know, there might be other occasions which would require social distancing. Not only pandemics, or epidemics. I mean, to take a worst case scenario, in the event of a nuclear attack, for example, or in the event of a nuclear outbreak, which might not be due to nuclear attack, but let's say there's a radiation leak in the atmosphere, people would have to be indoors, have to stay indoors. Well, this is something which is perhaps far-fetched in Malaysia, but not so if you're living in the United States of America or if you're living in South Korea. The South Koreans have to live with the specter throughout their lives. There's this fear of North Korean nuclear attack, which means to say that they will have to be prepared for social distancing due to other reasons. So ICT has become a strategic tool now in social organization, in national security even. So we normally talk about food security, but we don't realize security of social functioning, which is facilitated through ICT. So the importance of ICT will still be there, and the government won't totally abandon what it has invested in multimedia and so on, like what Mohd did before. So this will continue, but its continuation will be disrupted, at least for a while, because of the emphasis on recovery, on economic recovery post-COVID. So there might be a short lapse in further development of IR 4.0 and ICT. But once the COVID pandemic is under control and unemployment has been reduced, to an acceptable level, then I believe that there will be a full-scale development of ICT technology once again. Yeah. Can we go on to point 4? Yeah. Now, this is to do with what I would call the open visibility of economic inequalities, which was not given serious attention before. It was acknowledged. I mean, the poverty as a social phenomena was there, but people didn't take this notion of poverty line seriously and so on. You know, they thought it's something which happens in some African countries, but not in Malaysia. Yeah. But when the COVID pandemic strikes, we saw how many people were affected. Yeah. And it's not something trivial. Yeah? It's a matter of life and death for some people because, you know, they don't have enough money to buy food, even to put food on the table. Yeah. Just imagine if you come from a family which depends on daily businesses for incomes, like for example, you know, sell nasi lemak or sell some food. You are in the food business, yeah, where your income comes from this daily earnings, and then you have a 3-month lockdown, means to say that you cannot earn a living for 3 months and there's no other income. Yeah. And it's not a small number of people who are experiencing this, which is why the government introduced the stimulus packages. They know that otherwise people will starve. You see, there's no choice. It's not simply fanciful Keynesian economics. No, it's a matter of survival. Yeah. So the fault line, the economic fault line in society, it now becomes more visible. Its manifestations become clearer. Yeah. I mean, you see people, you know, queuing in the, forming long lines in the pawn shops. Yeah. Kedai pajak gadai, beratur orang bila buka pagi, kedai pajak gadai beratur orang. Yeah. To that extent, yeah, to get money, kena gadai apa-apa emas ke benda-benda cincin ke apa yang boleh dapat duit. Ya. Bermakna bahawa mereka ada kumpulan-kumpulan ini yang betul-betul terdesak. Ya. Dan kita tahu juga di UM pun ada kes students kelaparan dan sebagainya, tapi this kind of hidden poverty, yeah, was not revealed clearly before, but when the COVID pandemic came, this sort of hidden poverty becomes more visible, yeah, and has to be taken seriously. Yeah. And the poor not only suffer in terms of not having a daily income to even meet their daily food requirements, but also in terms of the education of the children, because during the lockdown, education has to be continued online. Yeah, so it means to say that you have to have internet access, and you have the devices, yeah, whatever handphones or laptops and so on, in order to continue functioning normally in the educational sector, yeah, in order to continue your education. But not everyone has a smartphone, not everyone has a laptop at home, which is what Professor Jomo has been pointing out, yeah, in one of his YouTube speeches. He said, not everyone can afford to continue the education online through smartphones and using the internet. Yeah? Even those who are not that poor have problems. For example, they don't have enough gig, data runs out monthly, and then the bandwidth is low, and they cannot follow the lectures clearly and so on. So again, those who are not that well off will be affected in terms of education. And it will have a long-term effect also, because once you are behind, it's difficult to catch up. Yeah? And the problem is more serious in the interior parts of the country, like in Sabah and Sarawak, And I've spoken to some of my colleagues from UPSI. Ya. And UPSI, Universiti Pendidikan Sultan Idris, ya, bukannya Universiti Persaraan Suami Isteri, jangan silap pula ya apa yang saya maksud dengan UPSI itu, ya, UPSI. Ya. Jadi di UPSI ramai pelajar-pelajar dari Sabah dan Sarawak. Ya. Dan saya bertanya kepada lecturer yang mengajar khusus MPU, khusus wajib, ya, falsafah dan isu semasa, bagaimana mereka meneruskan pengajaran kepada student-student mereka di Sabah dan Sarawak yang tak ada internet. Ya. Dan bukan saja tak ada internet, phone line pun tak ada. Kalau ada WhatsApp pun mereka at least they can teach through WhatsApp, hantar material ke tempat. Phone line pun tak ada. Tak ada phone line, tak ada internet. How to continue teaching the courses? Yeah. And they told me that they have to prepare the lecture materials before the semester starts and then put it on a thumb drive and mail it to them, hantar melalui pos. Ya. Dan kalau mereka nak ambil exam pun kadang-kadang kena naik boat pergi ke cyber cafe dan sebagainya. So you see, we in more fortunate circumstances, conditions might not feel this, yeah. But there is a big chunk, a big segment of the population who are experiencing difficulties, yeah, because of the lack of access to internet facilities and so on and so forth, which we have taken for granted before because these students are on site, on campus. Yeah? But once conditions are changed and they have to study or work from home through internet technology, then you can see the impact of the digital divide on education and on all other transactions that involves online transactions. Yeah? Okay. And here, I think the government in its next policy planning has to take this issue of digital divide more seriously and try to provide access to internet technology to all sectors of the population and try to think of how maybe using solar technology in the case of Sabah and Sarawak to provide these facilities to the people in the interior areas especially. Yeah? Can we move to the fifth point? The next slide, please. Okay. Now, prior to the COVID pandemic, we saw the rivalry between China and United States, yeah? in the realm and the field of economics, especially. There was intense economic rivalry between China and United States, and for example, manifested in the issue over 5G technology and how America tries to block the advance of advances made by Huawei and so on. You know? And even I think the CEO of one Chinese company was detained in Canada, United States. You know, and then the COVID pandemic came, yeah, and luckily Trump lost the election. I thought that was not blessing in disguise, but an open blessing. I think Trump losing the mandate of heaven, so to speak. So, what the COVID pandemic did, I think, was to give advantage to China over the United States. Yeah. And why do I say so? Well, firstly, fortunately enough for the Chinese, Trump was the president when America and the rest of the world were hit by the COVID pandemic. Why? Because Trump didn't take any action at all. His policy was a laissez-faire policy. Let things work it out by themselves. Let things work on its own. Yeah, let the problem work itself out. He ended up contracting the COVID disease. He was also a COVID patient at one point. Yeah, and also I think his chiefs of staff also. You know, after he declared that the official policy of the Trump administration was not to do anything after that, of making the announcement, he also got COVID. Yeah. So there was no vaccine program and so on. There was no proper health care, especially for the poor. And America suffered the most the largest number of deaths and the largest number of COVID cases amongst countries in the world. Yeah. Whereas China, although it was the first country to be affected by the COVID pandemic, took strict measures to deal with the problem, and it had the advantage of a strong central government, yeah? Because it still retained the characteristics of a socialist state, which was there previously, which implies a strong central government, and it was able to mobilize state resources, state apparatus in controlling the pandemic. Whereas in America, because of the nature of its political system, where you have this division between federal and state governments. In fact, we took over the American model of federation of individual states. Yeah? But I think we did better than them after that. Yeah? Where federal government does not have total control over the administration at the state level. Yeah. So in fact, in America, it's worse because they have the own state police. In our case, we have the PDRM, which is a central authority, and which is then stationed across and over the different states. So that's different. But in America, you have the local state sheriff and so on, and then you have the national level FBI and so on. And sometimes they're not well coordinated. So America could not act as well as China did in controlling the COVID pandemic. And as a result, it suffered much more than China. Yeah. And it had to put in stimulus packages and so on to the tune of trillions of dollars. Yeah. So what this means and what this implies is that at the end of this COVID pandemic, China is going to emerge stronger than the United States. Yeah, because the United States will be struggling to overcome the after effects of the COVID. And in fact, America is lucky because Joe Biden won the elections and then started this program of vaccination for the whole country and so on. If Trump had been re-elected, then it will be what I would call a free victory, walkover for China by the United States. But now with Joe Biden, America is back on its feet, and there is some competition still. Yeah, but in this new environment, post-COVID world, I think China will have an advantage. Yeah, and Malaysia's foreign policy has to be a bit careful with respect to China. We see how China can be aggressive in the Spratly Islands issue and so on. Yeah? China wants to have a total control over the South China Sea because it sees it as its historical heritage almost. Yeah. And in ASEAN, even there is a split between pro-China countries and countries who are not with China. So with the further rise of China, Malaysia has to be careful in its foreign policy and know how to play the game in balancing between the influence of America and China. Yeah? Okay, I think that's all that I want to say today. And I think I've given enough food for thought, and we can have a Q&A session after this if we have time. Yeah? Okay, Anam, back to you.
All right, thank you, Prof, for the very interesting